Shine within our hearts, loving Master, pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to understand the message of your gospel. Instill in us also the reverence of your blessed commandments, and putting down all sinful desires to pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things that are well pleasing to you. We are blessed together, beginning with Father, and your all holy, good, life-creating Spirit, now and forever, into the ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. So, last week kind of devolved into a Ask Father situation, which I love, because the reality is that I've done Bible studies, countless times. This is my third time doing Genesis. And sometimes people remember the things in them, but to me, what people oftentimes remember more than the material that I have planned for the class is the answers to their questions. So when people start asking questions, it makes me very, very happy. I would ask everyone that is present to pray for the servant of God, Panayoti. He is ill today, so he is not going to be with us for the in-house Bible study portion. Hello, hello.
Good morning.
So, I know where we were going with Genesis. We're about to start the story of Joseph. But before we get to that, are there any questions, concerns, or remembrances of the last two classes? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and begin with chapter 37.
Okay. This is Cindy. I'm sorry I'm late.
Well, it's my fault for being late, Cindy. I had an appointment that ran late, but you know what? That's okay. We're all here together now.
Okay.
So starting on chapter 37 of Genesis. Now, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. This is the genealogy of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the sheep with his brothers. Now the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zippah, his father's wives. And Joseph thought a bad report to them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age. He also made him a tunic of many colors. The Orthodox Study Bible says that Israel's love was partial, for he loved Joseph more than his other sons. Such love divided his family and opened the door of hatred. Thus Jacob was not yet perfected in love, for perfect love is impartial, but Christ loves all equally and died for all. So see that the humanity in our forefathers is still very much present. That issue that we saw with Isaac, we see also with Jacob, now being called Israel as his appropriate name. So he loved Joseph the best, the baby of the group, and gave him an amazing coat of many colors. Now, why would that be a big deal? Why would getting a coat of many colors be impressive?
The dye, perhaps?
Exactly. It's multiple dyes. And for a cloak that has it, like, for example, Jesus Christ, he had a tunic that was basically one piece sewn top to bottom, and it was considered a big deal. So this takes place, thousands of years prior to that. And it's even more so that you would have a coat that, first of all, having a coat is pretty impressive. But then second of that, it has multiple colors. That shows that multiple, threads and things went into it, and that dyes went into it. So this was a very expensive gift that was given to his son. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak civilly to him. Then Joseph had a dream and reported it to his brothers. Thus he said to them, "Hear this dream I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, And indeed, your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. So his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Ooh. So Joseph basically told his brothers, so I had a dream in which all of you bowed down to me. So you can imagine how well that worked. Anytime that you have siblings thinking that parents love one over the other, it can definitely cause issues and animosity between the siblings. And so brothers became very, very upset, very, very angry. And they were already angry, and then Joseph manifested his unique charisma. Now, this is important because when we talk about dreams, many people will, ask a priest, I had a dream about blank. What did it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? And one of the reasons why people will ask that is because they'll look at this story and they'll say, okay, dreams mean something. The problem is that somebody that has the charisma of dreams is that basically if you have that charisma, you're a receiver. And so you're able to pick things up. Problem is, you have no idea where that's coming from. Is it coming from God? Is it coming from Satan? You don't know. So unless you have spiritual discernment and the ability to basically understand dreams, it is of no value to you. And so that's why the Orthodox Church uniformly says, ignore dreams. Don't pay them mind, because we don't know where they came from. If you have the spiritual gift of Joseph, then yes, you could do that. And Joseph is unique, and we're going to see why more and more. But Joseph is unique because he is able to interpret dreams because of the spirituality of his faith, which allows him to understand what is happening, where he is not only able to understand his dreams, but other people's dreams too. So Joseph, when he had this dream of the sheaves, he knew full well what it meant. It meant that I'm going to be upright, and all of my brothers are going to bow down to me. And of course, that did happen. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down on the ground before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So even with his father, these dreams are becoming an issue. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers shepherding the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. He said to them, here I am. Then Israel said to him, go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the sheep, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. So the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? He replied, I am looking for my brothers. Tell me where they are feeding their sheep. The man said to him, they are departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say some wild beasts have devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let's not kill him. Again Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit in the desert, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped his tunic of many colors off him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit which was empty, and there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal, and lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelite wayfarers coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? The Orthodox Study Bible says, Joseph's brothers were motivated by the love of money and possessions, for they did not know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Thus the Midianite traders passed by, and the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of gold. So they took Joseph to Egypt. The Orthodox Study Bible states, Joseph's brothers cast him into a pit, then lifted him out and sold him into a slave into Egypt. However, he ultimately became the Lord of all Egypt. Similarly, Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, was killed and buried in his grave, but he rose again and became the Lord of all. So, Joseph is an archetype of Jesus Christ in this way. Put into the ground, but coming up again later for glory. So they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and then when he saw Joseph was not in there, he tore his clothes. So he returned to his brother and said, the lad is not there, and where shall I go? So Reuben had intended to not only not kill him, but rescue his brother from his brothers that had become quite murderous. Then they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors and had it brought to their father and said, we found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? Really? A super expensive tunic full of many colors? Yeah, he knew it was his son's. So he recognized it and said, this is my son's tunic. A wild animal has devoured Joseph and carried him off. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. Thus all his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. So his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an office of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Now we're going to take a pause from the story of Joseph and turn instead to the story of Judah and Tamar. Now, this is a very interesting and weird story. And what's even more weird about it is that it is referenced in the wedding ceremony. And it's going to seem even weirder when you hear the story. But it's related to a ring. Before we continue, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, or comments on the betrayal of Joseph by his brothers?
No, just that Reuben was the only brother that was going to try and save him. He was a good brother.
Yeah.
Did Reuben believe in God? It sounded like the other brothers did not believe in God.
They believed in God, but in the similar way that some of the other siblings did. Now, this is not the same kind of concept as Esau. Esau was worshiping foreign gods. Because remember, these are the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is, not just one, but the line of that. So this is not the same concept. They're mistaken. They are sinful. They're worldly, but they're not in the same category as Ishmael or as Esau. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but they mentioned in the thing that they didn't worship the same God.
It didn't say that they didn't worship the same God. It said that they cared more for worldly possessions.
Oh.
So let's go to the story of Judah and Tamar. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adamite, whose name was Hira. Then Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son and called his name She conceived once again and bore a son and called his name Onan. She conceived yet again and bore a son and called his name Shelah. She was at Chezib when she bore them. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil at the light, and God killed him. So Judah said to Oman, go into your brother's wife and marry her, and as her brother-in-law, raise up seed to your brother. So Judah is one of Israel's sons from the tribe of Judah. And his firstborn son was a jerk. He was betrothed to this woman Tamar, and he died. So now he's telling his second son, Onan, to marry Tamar. Make sense so far?
Okay.
But Onan knew the seed would not be his, and it came to pass that whenever he went into his brother's wife, he emitted his semen on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. So Onan also is vile. So in other words, he is not trying to conceive. He's basically using Tamar, which is violent in and of itself. There's, not to sound gross, but this is one of the verses that the church goes back to when we look at the sin of masturbatory practices as vile, where it says that it's better that a seed should fall into a whore than onto the ground, like Onan. So this is considered wrong. But the thing he did appeared evil in the sight of the Lord. Therefore he also put him to death. So by the very act that he was not trying to conceive with Tamar, God killed him. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. We said, lest he also die like his brothers. So Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So now she is widowed twice, and her betrothed-to-be is still a kid. So obviously she can't marry him yet. So she has been put aside temporarily. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timah, he and his shepherd Hira the Adamite. So it was told to Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timah to shear his sheep. Thus she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, made herself beautiful, and sat down near the gates of Ainan on the way past Timnah, for she saw Shelah was grown, and she was not given him as a wife. So she's basically been cast off. She's been remained a widow all this time. So basically she has no value in society. She's basically looked down upon. She sees that the man that she's supposed to be married to is now of age. Nothing's happening. Nothing's going on. So she has concocted a scheme, basically get one over on her father-in-law. And this is going to get kind of gross, so brace yourselves. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face and he did not recognize her. Then he turned to her by the way and said, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what would you give me that you may come into me? He replied, I will send a young goat from the flocks. So she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give you? She said, your ring and cord and the staff in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. Thus Judah sent the young goat by the hand of the shepherds the Adamite to receive his pledge from the woman, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of the place, saying, where is the prostitute who was in Ainan by the roadside? They replied, there was no prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of that place said, the prostitute had been there. Then Judah said, let her have them, lest we should become a laughingstock. For I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. Thus it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has committed fornication and is pregnant because of her adultery. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. The Orthodox Study Bible says, those who reported to Judah viewed fornication and adultery as one and the same sin. For some say fornication is sin committed by a single people, whereas adultery is committed by married people. Both fornication and adultery, however, is one and the same sin. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. So she said, determine whose these are, the ring, the cord, and the staff. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son, but he never knew her again. Then it came to pass at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. So it was when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened as she drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore she called his name Perez. Afterwards his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and she called his name Zerah. So it is kind of interesting that during the wedding service that you hear the phrase, through a ring, the identity of Tamar was discovered. So before we continue into the story of Joseph with chapter 39, any comments, thoughts, or questions on this interlude with Judah and Tamar? It is a very interesting story in which basically Tamar takes matters into her own hands to basically restitution from Judah, who was not dealing with her fairly or correctly. I certainly don't condone her methods at all, but we see that Judah said, she is way better than me. She was dealt wrongly, and she brought shame to me, because basically she embarrassed him totally.
Okay,
So now we're going to get back to Joseph.
That, go ahead, question.
what was that again about in the wedding ceremony about the ring?
So during the betrothal ceremony, there's references to rings to basically show that rings are important. They've been part of Scripture since the beginning. And so one of the lines from that prayer is, by a ring, the identity of Tamar was discovered. In other words, the ring that she had was a signet ring. It was basically Judah's ring. So by her having that ring, she's like, I didn't bring shame to your household. You brought shame to your household. Because the idea that she had betrayed her widowhood by sleeping around, although I don't understand how in the world him sleeping with a prostitute is not the same concept of betrayal. But again, worldliness, sinfulness. But she basically shows by a ring, by that signet ring, I didn't bring dishonor to your house, you did. And so she was justified. Does that answer your question?
So,
No.
does the ring then signify that she belonged to Judah, like the wife would belong to the husband? Or
Doctor, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Closer to the thing.
Did the ring signify that she belonged to Judah, like the wife would belong to the husband and the husband to the wife? Or
No, the ring in the case of what happened was basically, she did that on purpose. When she basically, saw that he was seeing her as a prostitute, she knew that she would receive a promise, and then said, okay, well, he said, well, what will I give you then? Because she said, what sign will you give me that this will actually happen? In other words, yeah. You're saying you're going to give me goats and herds and stuff. What proof do I have that you're actually going to pay me for this? And so that's when he asked, okay, well, what do you want me to give you? And she purposely said, give me your belt, your ring, and your staff. So all these things were indisputable identifiers so that everyone would know for a fact this was Judah's property. It was not to signify that Tamar was Judah's property, but rather that she had not betrayed the family. Rather, she had been cast out twice. She had had two basically abusive husbands, and her father-in-law was not doing anything to help her. So she took matters into her own hands. So the ring of discovery shows, independence, and it shows her clever thinking. This is I like these images within the marriage service because, I'm sorry, go ahead, doctor.
that explains the past, but what about the present?
Correct.
What do you mean the present?
The ring in the wedding ceremony.
The ring of the wedding ceremony is the idea that rings symbolize power. So that signet ring was a symbol of power of Judah's house. by a ring, her identity was discovered. So in other words, a ring is not something that just a commoner has. It's not something that is just, willy-nilly tossed about. Rings were important. They aren't just simple bands. It would have had his image on it. This is why when you go to those museums and you look at rings from these ancient periods, they're always sigil rings. They're always have identifying markings on them so that you can tell exactly who it belongs to. And so in the case of the wedding service, the ring in and of itself symbolizes the unity of husband and wife, but it also symbolizes lordship. It symbolizes authority. And it was basically Tamar seizing authority from Judah because he had stolen it from her by not giving his youngest son to her. What's interesting about that is that when we read the wedding epistle, it basically talks about, women should be, following their husbands, and all things be faithful to their husbands, respect their husbands, follow their husbands. But in that single line of that prayer, we see a woman taking charge, leadership, and authority, which symbolizes again that St. Paul is talking mystically and spiritually, and it is not putting slavery on a woman. Does that answer your question, Doctor?
I think so.
Is that cleared up for everybody?
I'm not sure.
So it's a weird story. Basically, this woman was wronged, and she took weird matters into her hands so that she could become, have authority again, instead of just being cast out. Because basically, her life was over. She was cast off as a widow, waiting for her life to have meaning. I mean, this is a young woman who was basically used by two men, and God, in his wisdom, struck both of those men dead. And so she used her feminine wiles in order to get that ring, to show she had authority, to show that it was Judah that messed up, not her. So she basically cuckolded that Lord so that she could be brought back into what she needed to be.
I think we're having problems because we're looking at today's mores and thinking like, oh, whoa, this doesn't make sense, like then you go have relations with your father-in-law. It's like, whoa.
No, it's vile what she did. But the reality is that Judah was completely ignoring her. She really had zero recourse because women were seen as property. Women were not given really any real authority. And so that left her with precious little alternative. She was seen as property. She was seen as Judah's property because she was, his daughter-in-law. And so what he did by sleeping with his daughter-in-law shows a couple of things. One, because even in that society, who's the one in power?
He is, yeah.
Exactly, he is. He's the one that had authority. So it's one thing to look at her and go, oh, she got pregnant because she had dalliances with a stable boy or something. It's another thing entirely when you realize, wait, you slept with a girl and you didn't even realize it was your daughter-in-law? How did you not know that was your daughter-in-law? That you actually had dialogue with this person, you bartered on a price, and you didn't realize it was your daughter-in-law. And then you actually had the audacity to give away your signet ring to what you thought was a prostitute. So it really showed Judah was the one completely in the wrong. Because in all reality, he should have realized, wait, aren't you my son's daughter? He only has 3 sons. And both of his first kids are both dead. And his third son is supposedly waiting for this girl. So this girl should be important to him. Should have significance to him. And yet he treats her like an object. And so she takes back her autonomy, takes back her personhood. Again, the way she did it was weird in the highest, but because of this, she was able to reclaim her position in society and to basically show what kind of a jerk Judah was on all kinds of levels. The fact that he completely rejected her and left her like that was horrible. He had ruined her life. And then to not even recognize her when she, was by the road. I mean, that really shows him only seeing her as a piece of meat.
Okay, I totally understand that. What I'm having trouble understanding is how that relates to today's wedding ceremony and the ring. I understand the significance of the ring in that context.
Because it blends in.
Today's context in the middle of a marriage ceremony.
So in the middle of the marriage ceremony, the context that we have within Thamar is twofold. One, it shows the autonomy of the woman, that she is not a slave, that she is not a piece of meat, that she has authority. She can take her authority, that she is not a slave to the man. And then second, it shows identity. Her identity, the husband's identity as Lord and lady of their house.
Okay. That's the key. Now it makes sense.
So in a weird way, it's empowering the woman to show that she is not a piece of meat, that she is not a slave. But at the same time, it is very weird that that was what it took in order for her to reclaim her position in society and to basically make Judah understand just how badly he screwed up. He messed up big.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to Joseph, chapter 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, Pharaoh's eunuch and captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph. He was a successful man, and he was living in the house of his lord the Egyptian. So his lord saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Thus Joseph found grace in his sight, pleasing to him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and put everything he had under Joseph's authority. So it was, from the time he made him overseer of his house, all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all he had in Joseph's hand, and did not know what he had except for the bread he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So this man, Potiphar, has so much trust in Joseph. It's like, yeah, I don't even care. He's not checking up. He's not like doing due diligence, saying, okay, well, what am I really making? What am I doing? Because he has that much trust in Joseph, because Joseph has shown himself to be that much of a remarkably honest and good man. But as you just saw, he's also very handsome. Now we're about to see a diametrically opposed character study between Judah and Joseph. Judah, who could not control his baser instincts, sought out a prostitute. Let's see what Joseph does. Then it came to pass after these things that his Lord's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his Lord's wife, look, my Lord does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to have relations with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hands, and fled and ran out. This is said during Holy Week. And it's amazing because the idea for Joseph is that it is less shameful for him to be running naked in the streets than to commit this great sin. So we have this character in Joseph that he, despite the fact that there's no one in the house, no one would know, his Lord has absolute trust in him. In theory, he could, quote unquote, get away with it. He knows that he cannot do that. How could he face God, who has given him all these blessings, who has done all these things for him? Despite the fact that he's been sold as a slave, despite the fact of all these things happening, Joseph is still living a holy life. And so for him, she grabbed his clothes, said, fine, take the clothes, and he ran. This is the difference between those two people. And so there's a starkness here. We see this interlude of what happened with Judah and Tamar to see this kind of worldly, fleshly focus on other people versus Joseph, who is extremely spiritual, and why he is a prototype of Christ in this context. So it was, when she saw he had left his garment in her hand and fled the house, she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he brought to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. Thus it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled out and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until the Lord came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant you brought to us came in to me and to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his Lord heard the voice of his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did this to me after this manner. His anger was aroused. Then Joseph's Lord took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, do we see how the devil interacts between relations? He trusts Joseph so much that it says that he didn't know anything other than that the bread he was eating. That was the level of trust he had in Joseph. But he doesn't ask Joseph what happened. He doesn't turn to him. He just immediately says, he did this. But we notice that Joseph, despite the fact that this great shame has come upon him, he's not arguing. He's not trying to excuse himself. And he didn't count it embarrassing to run away naked. This is the difference between justice and righteousness, and how Joseph is showing himself to be righteous in his decision-making, and how God is with him even within the prison. It says in the Orthodox Study Bible, Joseph's holiness cost him his freedom. Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, from 2 Timothy. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him grace in the sight of the chief prison keeper. So the chief keeper of the prison put under Joseph's authority both the prison and all the prisoners, and whatever they did there. The chief keeper of the prison did not look into anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So, because Joseph suffered for righteousness' sake, therefore the Lord is with him. And he blessed him. So Joseph, he's going from situation to situation, and no matter who he's with or what he's doing, he's making it better just by living a righteous life. So this prison man now has the same love and respect for Joseph that Potiphar had. Like, I don't even need to worry about it because Joseph has it under control. Obviously, we're building up because we're building up to Pharaoh, which we probably will not get to today. But this is what we're building up to, this level of trust that they have in Joseph. And this blessing is happening because of his righteousness. Because of his righteousness, God is blessing everything that he's doing. So we see the difference between chapter 38 and 39 is the unrighteousness of Judah versus the righteousness of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Now it came to pass, this is starting chapter 40, after these things, that the king of Egypt's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. So Pharaoh was angry with his two eunuchs, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Thus he put them in custody with the chief bodyguard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. Then the chief jailer committed them to Joseph, and he tended to them, so they were in the custody for a while. Then the king of Egypt's chief cupbearer and the chief baker, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. So Joseph came into them in the morning, and looked at them, and saw they were troubled. Then he asked Pharaoh's eunuchs, who were with him in the custody of his lord, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" So they said to him, "We each had a dream, and there's no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Therefore relate them to me." And the Orthodox Study Bible says, Joseph glorified God and not himself. This is humility in the truest sense. So he is relating this to them so that he can relate it to God. God is the one that interprets the dream, not him. Then the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph and said to him, "Behold, in my dream, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth the ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days Pharaoh will remember your position and restore your office of chief cupbearer, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, according to the former manner, when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you, and have mercy on me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I also have done nothing for them to put me into this dungeon." When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream, and there were 3 white baskets in my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket in my head." So Joseph answered and said, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you." Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he remembered the positions of his chief cupbearer and chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So the Orthodox Study Bible says, since the cupbearer forgot Joseph, he also forgot the true God who delivered him from prison. His position as the king's favorite caused him to forget, for he loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. We're going to pause there, because obviously the next section is going to deal with Pharaoh and his dream, eventually the restoration of Joseph's family. But let's pause there for a moment and look at this, because this is important to understand why Joseph is able to interpret dreams, but we are not. Do we understand why this is? Why we would look to Joseph, that he is interpreting dreams? People just have dreams and they say, what happened? What does this mean? Does this make sense? Because it seems to me, many times I hear of Greek people, especially, they'll say, "Ika oniro," that I had a dream, and this happened in the dream, and it means this, and this, and this, and this. And this is problematic. Because yes, someone sends dreams. In the case of each of these stories within the these chapters of Genesis, each of these visions were sent by God, not for these individuals, but to show the glory of God, because all of this is building. All of this is to show what is going to happen. And the reason why Joseph was able to interpret the dreams was because, and he said it, only God can interpret dreams, which means that this, and he recognizes it as such, it is charisma, a spiritual gift, is given to him by God, and therefore only God can control it. Do these things make sense? So before we close, are there any questions, thoughts, concerns, or even just random questions? Like I said at the beginning of class, sometimes the questions that don't even have anything to do with the lesson plan are the most edifying because people will remember them even more than perhaps the lesson.
Does it say why the baker was? I had to take this phone from my dad. Did they say why the baker was hung?
No, and nor does it say why the wine, the cupbearer was spared. These are incidental details.
Oh, okay.
But it was also to show that, Joseph is not just giving happy dreams. He basically, it is what it is. It was on the table. Okay, yeah, in 3 days, you're going to be restored. You're going to die.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even like nice either. It was like, you're going to be hanged and birds are going to eat your flesh.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So what did he do? Don't know. What did the cupbearer do? Don't know. It's not important to the story because they're not the Israelites. They are not the ones that are God's chosen people at this point. And so their story doesn't matter. It basically just moved our story along. All we know is that Pharaoh, for whatever reason, on his birthday, decided the cupbearer, I wronged him, and so I'm going to put him back in his position. That baker, kill that guy. So something happened, but apparently it's not important enough for us to remember. They're just characters in the story to basically show the extent of what it means. And why? Because obviously the cupbearer is going to be important in the next section to tell Pharaoh about Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. So they're basically a narrative vehicle to get us to the next point.
Okay.
Any other questions, thoughts, or concerns?
This was a lot to take in.
Yes, it was. The story of Thamar always weirded me out because we read about Thamar and, within the course of Scripture, it's treating her like a hero, and yet you're like, but what she did was...
Right.
So it's strange to me. And again, it is purposely placed there in Scripture, not just for the idea of genealogy, to show how those twins came to live, because they obviously are part of the genealogy of the 12 tribes. But more so, because obviously a lot of characters are listed, a lot of individuals. But it's more so to point out the stark difference in character between Judah and Joseph. That Judah wanted to sleep with a prostitute versus Joseph, who would not betray anything for anyone because his honor and his love of God would not allow him to betray. And so even though his holiness caught him and he was thrown in prison for no good reason, he did it gladly. But that doesn't mean that he's a doormat. He did ask the cupbearer, said, remember me. Tell Pharaoh that I'm innocent. Like you're innocent, I'm innocent. But you are right. It's a lot to take in.
Yes.
I can't remember who was that said that Genesis is like a soap opera. Ladies, I apologize once again that we started Bible study so late. I appreciate you all coming, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful day. Heavenly King, the fruit of truth, present all places, and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord.
Amen.
Amen.